should be fine with whatever soil you're using. All right, so harvesting, cooking, preserving from the garden. So we're going to talk about different types of tips to, on harvesting tips, like how, when to harvest things, and then how to harvest things, properly, so you can hopefully continue to harvest throughout the season. We're going to talk about. There's a whole section I like to call alternative edibles, and unfortunately, that's not about medicinal marijuana edibles. A lot of people always ask that. It's more about like random parts of plants that you don't think you can eat that is actually really delicious. So talk about, and then we're going to talk about cooking techniques for different things you pull from the garden, and then talk about how to actually preserve that that food so it lasts a while. So just so you don't have to eat everything all at once. So it's harvesting tips. So I'm going to start out with this. This is a general estimate. I tried to base this on multiple different, growing calendars and my own experience. Things could be off, especially different varieties can mature quicker or later, and you can, mix this up by, buying bigger, seedlings and stuff. But on general, these are the kind of plants that grow really quick, mature, quickly. So when they mature, they're ready to be harvested. And some things, when they mature, that they're ready to be harvested all at once. But most things, as long as you're doing it right, once they mature, you can continue harvesting them for months and months. Really, I mean, if you think about quick growing things, like lettuces and greens and okra, super quick, spinach. Like medium size, things that may take a couple more months to mature. These are your broccolis and or your tomatoes and early season potatoes. Potatoes have, we talked about they have different seasons. There's like early, mid and late season. And that's how long it takes for the potatoes to actually mature and how big they're going to get. So like the early ones, 2 to 3 months. But then like, the long-term ones, so these are the ones, so these are a little bit more difficult things to grow sometimes. I mean, they can take, up to 3, 4, 5 more months. Some of them aren't bad, like sweet potatoes is really, grows really easy in this area, and it's fine because we have a long, summer. As long as you plant them, early enough in the summer, you're fine. But things like, like Brussels sprouts and cabbages, they can be a little bit difficult, especially if you're trying to get them ripe, mature in the cool weather season, like in an entire spring. It could be kind of difficult. That's why sometimes you have to, provide them a little shade and like water them extra, and even like get them maturity in the middle of the summer, even though they're, or in fall, even though like Brussels sprouts and cabbage are cool weather crops. So. But this kind of gives you just a understanding of when things mature, so like and like just some when you can expect certain things to be ready to harvest but you can speed things up by buying seedlings and slips and bulbs. Like we're gonna talk about onions. Like if you're growing onions, you want to grow bulbs because they take so long, to grow from seeds. All right, so now we're gonna kind of jump into like tips on actually harvesting different things. So harvesting greens, there's a couple different tips depending on what kind of green that you're harvesting. Um, so if you're harvesting like large leaf things, these are your chards and your collards and your kale. You want to harvest them. You want to harvest like the big thing, the leaves first. And depending on what it is, like with collards and kale, you want to start from the bottom. That's where the leaves are going to mature quick enough, and you want to work your way up. And you basically want to turn your kale plants and your collard plants into like palm trees. Because this way, if you do this and you don't harvest more, and you leave at least a third of the plant, leave enough leaves so it can still get chlorophyll and keep on growing. I see a lot of people that when they see kale ready, they just cut the whole plant off, and it just kills me because kale will produce for months. I even know, like, if you get, I've seen people like City Blossoms is really great at doing this, where they'll start the kale in the spring, and they'll give it a little bit of shade and water and give it extra attention over the summer. And then by fall, they'll have these they're like 4-foot tall palm trees. They're insane. So you can really, get a big season out of kale and collards. But once they do bolt, and when they, and a lot of times that's out of your control. If they get too hot, they'll bolt because they're cool weather, crops. At that point, you want to, harvest the bolt. And we'll talk about that later, and then remove the plant. But as long as you keep them from bolting, they'll keep on growing for a while. And when you don't want to, cut these branches off, you want to snap them back. So this is the best photo I found. But you basically want to hold them and you pull them down and just snap them off. And their branches should come off real easy when you pull them backwards. You don't want to leave big stumps. These you want them to look like this, like little nubs, and that's going to heal nicely, and your plant will be healthy and it will keep on growing. But then chard. It's a little bit different. Chard, you're not harvesting from the bottom, you're harvesting from the outer layers. So the leaves are going to get bigger and big. The outside ones are going to be the first ones to mature. And for these, you can snap them off, but I'll cut them off with scissors or a knife. And I usually won't leave this much of a stump. I'll try to cut them a little bit closer, but they'll keep on producing, and you just want to keep on cutting out the outside leaves, and the inside leaves will keep on growing inside. But again, you always want to leave at least a third of the plant, if not half of it, so it'll rebound and will keep on growing for a really long time. For like loose leaves, like if you're growing like mesclun mixes or spinaches and things like that, when you grow them up like this, you have to seed them, you have to thin them out and seed them. You seed them along a row and then thin them out, and then they grow in this nice bunches. You do what's called cut and come again, where you grab a handful of them and just cut them, not at the base. You want to leave like a couple inches left of it. Because that will regrow, another, like couple times, depending on, how hot it is, and eventually it will bolt, or it will just get too bitter to eat. But you can get a couple, cuttings out of these guys if you do this method, the cut and come again method. And then if you're harvesting like bok choys and stuff, and things that have like are giant lettuce heads. You can, like I've seen people, you can pull them completely out of the ground. You can cut them at the base, that's fine. But you can also do a cut and come again with these guys. Like a chart, this is a bok choy. So if you cut it at the base and leave like an extra inch about it, they'll regrow back. And not always. Sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes there's just not time. It gets too hot. But a lot of times you'll get another smaller head. And then it's sometimes like for harvesting for thinning, so if you're doing like, these mixes and stuff, instead of thinning them all at once, you could slowly thin them, like every day go out and just thin a little bit more and just make yourself a nice like microgreen salad, every day out of the thinning. And then the more you thin, the thicker the more mature they'll get. And it's just, you're kind of maturing these plants over time. Let's see, how about beets? Yeah, we'll talk about beets in a second. Definitely, yeah, beets. We'll have a whole section on root crops. All right, I just want to really make. Okay, yeah. All right. And then broccoli and Brussels sprouts. So these are really fantastic plants. The great thing about these plants is like broccoli, you can eat every part of broccoli. Like people, mainly just eat these giant, like, florets. They'll have one big one in the top, and once you harvest that, they'll have a couple in the sides mini ones you can harvest. But when you're done with it, you can eat the stalks, you can eat the leaves. The leaves are very similar to collards. It's a really delicious plant. And the idea with broccoli is you want to get them when the heads are about the size of like a matchstick. You want to get it before it starts, spreading out, because once it starts like thinning out, you can see their spaces forming. It's a day or two later it's going to bloom, because each one of these florets is a flower head, and once it flowers, then it gets bitter and all that stuff. So you want to get it before. So you want to harvest it while it's still tightly in there, and basically when these guys are the size of match heads. But if you start noticing it getting yellow or starting spinning out, thinning out, you want to harvest it as soon as possible. Brussels sprouts are fantastic plant. So again, the leaves are basically collards as well. So you want to, as it, plant gets, like a foot or two tall, you want to do that same thing and like treat it like a normal collard plant. You want to start snapping off the more mature leaves on the bottom. This kind of opens up the bottom and allows the Brussels sprouts to kind of form more naturally. It has more circulation, so there's less, chances of mold issues and fungus and stuff. So you want to start working your way up. Again, leave at least a third of the leaves at all times. And then you're waiting for these little guys to Brussels sprouts to grow to about 1 to 2 inches. So everyone hopefully seen like a Brussels sprout in the grocery store. So that's about the size that you're looking for. But the problem with this is like they mature quicker, they mature at different levels, time. So the bottoms will mature faster. So you'll harvest, if you're going to harvest like a little bit over a time, you can pick a handful of Brussels sprouts, like maybe like once a week, and then you work your way up until all of them are ripe. But if you want, but that's kind of, if you want to just have a lot of ripe ones very quickly, what they do at farms is they'll chop off the heads of the tops of the plant. So basically, like the top 6 inches, they'll just chop all that off. And that, for some reason, I don't really understand the biology, but it freaks out the plant. And then within a week or two, a couple of weeks, all of them will become mature. So then you can harvest them all at once. And then melons and eggplants. So everyone's got some like way to test with melons. But I mean melons, I personally think there's no like full. I mean the best way with melons is just to try one when you think it's ripe. Don't harvest all of them at once. Cut one off, use a knife and cut it at the stem, and then try it out. And then if it's not, I mean, if it's close to ripe, they'll often ripen on their own. But I would wait and until you actually try a ripened melon and before you harvest the rest of them. But a couple indications is one, like the rind will change. You start getting the green will get a little bit more duller. The part that sits on the ground on the soil is usually it's like it changes from this like greenish white or like mild yellow to a really creamy strong like kind of like mustardy yellow. So that's a good indicator it's getting ripe. Another part is like at the base of these there's these little stems that when they start curling like this, that's an indicator that the watermelon or any kind of melon it's getting ripe. So you just but again, like I mean, people claim you can knock on it, and if it sounds hollow, I mean, it all sounds the same to me when I'm knock on it. But some people can detect that. But again, yeah, just try one. Don't harvest all your watermelons at once. You never know. And then other melons, you just got to do your research. There's so many different ways, like some like, cantaloupes and stuff. It's about the smells or the webbing, when that's, forms more. Sometimes you have to wait for certain varieties to actually fall off the vine. Sometimes there's not much indicators. You just have to like, you have to do the math and you have to figure out, I mean, like if it takes 90 days to mature and then you can put that in your calendar and then you try a melon during that week. So eggplant's really important. You want to and be on top of your game with eggplant because you don't want it to. Oh, it's really easy to over ripen. Eggplant, you want it shiny, and bright, and you want to be able to like take your fingertip and be able to like make a little indent into the and you want to be able to kind of break the skin a little bit with your fingertip. It wants to be a tender. But if you wait too long, then it looks like this. It's dull, and it just becomes woody and bitter. At that point, don't leave it on the plant. Cut that off, but then throw it in your compost bin because I mean, there's nothing you can really do to make that good. But and that's a really important thing I want to emphasize. When you mess up, and you don't you don't harvest things in the right timing. This, it's no big deal. But you want to like cut the things off because that eggplant's going to continue to pull nutrients from that plant. So you want to cut it off to save your nutrients. But also when you harvest, a lot of these plants, the more you harvest, then the more it triggers things in the plant, and then starts producing more fruit. So the more you harvest, oftentimes the more fruit you'll get. And peas, beans, and potatoes. So peas and beans. So these, I mean, you kind of have to do your research on when they're ripe. Every bean and pea is a little bit different, but in general, you want to get them when they start to fill out, but not when they're completely like bursting. You want to get them before they're like fully mature. When you could, oftentimes you could still see like the beans, inside. Again, like you got to do a little research to figure out exactly when. There's different timings for stuff, but this is important. With peas and beans, you want to try to harvest. You want to try to harvest every day with your peas and beans because this is one of those plants where the more you pick, the more you'll get. So the more you can harvest, like you're going to have a lot more crop. And it's really important. You don't just want to pull these guys off or tear them off. You can cut them, but ideally there's this little thumb trick where you just you put your thumb at the tip, and your thumb just kind of pushes up. it pushes forward and upward, and it just snaps the bean and pea off. And if you could do that, it's really easy to do. But if you could do that, that's going to heal over nicely, and it's going to stimulate a lot more growth and a lot more production. And then potatoes. Potatoes are real easy. Just when the tops start browning and are dying, that's a good indicator that they're ripe in the soil. You can get like a garden fork and kind of don't go into the area, but just around the area. Just step on that garden fork and just kind of push up and just kind of loosen the soil around there. And then from there, you can kind of either stick your hands in there or get some like garden. You want to be careful with like shovels and stuff, because if you end up nicking the potato, it's still fine, but you got to eat. You can't store those. Like any potatoes that are nicked or have any wounds, they're going to rot instead of being able to store them for a couple months. So you just want to be careful pulling them out. It's a fun activity to do with kids. Having kids, like once you loosen up the soil, have a bunch of kids, just like start looking for potatoes. And then even I know a lot of times before they're ripe too. I know a lot of friends from potato farms, they would just shove their hands into the soil and just pull out, some potatoes. Because a lot of times, I mean, they're baby potatoes at that point, so it's still good. They just don't store that well. But really, you're only, if you want to store potatoes, you're doing late season potatoes. Like the early season and mid season, those are a lot of like the smaller, more tender potatoes that you're going to eat, fresh. If you ever see a green potato, throw that away. It's sunlight hit it and something happens and it gets kind of toxic. So I don't think it's going to kill you, but it's going to make you pretty sick if you eat it. So definitely throw any green potatoes away. Okra and corn. So okra is like the easiest thing to grow. If you like okra, you're definitely in luck. The problem with okra is just getting, harvesting before they get too mature, and because you want to get them at 2 to 4 inches. So that's when they're still tender and delicious. But after they get about, past that, after once they get 5 or 6 inches, they start getting woody and super bitter. And there's not much you can do to revive them. So, but if that does happen, again, cut them. You want to cut them kind of at the base. Don't cut them in the okra. You want to cut it with a knife or scissors right below at the stem and leave a little bit of a nub. But yeah, it's really, if you're growing okra, you want to check it almost daily. And you want to harvest, you're going to be harvesting daily, basically. Okra is like super easy and super plentiful to grow. Corn. So corn is like when you look for the silks on top. So when the silks start turning brown, that's a good indicator that it's probably ripe. If you want to make sure, you can peel back a little bit, and if you use your fingertip, and if you just break a kernel, and if it's clear juice, it can still use in another week or two. But if it's like milky juice that comes out, then it's good. And typically most corn, you're only going to get like 1 or 2 ears from per stalk. So. That's why you don't see a lot of like urban, farmers growing corn. It's mainly something that you need a lot of land to really make, worth your while. But I mean, it's a cool, it's a cool experience if you can grow a handful of them. It's just fun to grow. But it's also, you want to be, every time I've grown corn, it's been at community gardens, and they've always been stolen before. I've been able to like harvest them. So it's definitely one of those things that, people can identify from far away, and it's tempting. So peppers and cucumbers. So peppers, a lot of times peppers, most, you could get certain peppers that are bred to be certain colors and certain qualities, but most peppers generally, they start out green and then they turn, yellow or orange, and then they get red. And as they're turning, green is more like savory. There's not a lot of sugars. But then the red ones, as they turn different colors, they either get more sugars, they get sweeter, or if it's like a hot, habanero or something like that, they'll actually get hotter. They'll build up, as they mature. So it's really about what your preference, between sweet and savory versus like, hot, and how hot you want your peppers to be. Like jalapenos, if you leave them on the stalk, they'll get really, really hot. So harvest them with knives and pruners. Don't just pull them off. That's going to damage the plant, and then it's not going to produce as well. Cucumbers, you want to get them when they're green as possible. You want to get them before they start, yellowing. A lot of times the cucumbers, it's just about doing your research and figuring out, when cucumbers, ripen. Like if you have dill, they're going to ripen between 4 to 6 inches. So when maybe go out there with a measuring tape, and once you hit 4 to 6 inches, harvest them. Don't wait until they grow a bigger, because then they're going to get woody and yellow and stuff like that. So you want to try to, for cucumbers, you want to have you definitely want to you'll know like the maximum amount is going to grow before it starts getting bad, and then try to harvest it beforehand. But a lot of times, I mean, you figure that out really quickly, and after like growing cucumbers for a year or two, when to pick them and stuff. I mean, it's but and summer squash versus winter squash. So summer squash, there are two different varieties, summer squash and winter squashes. I mean, they have two different traits. Like summer squash is more like bush-like. So these are going to be large bushes. It's like zucchini, the yellow squash, the patty pan, zucchini, things like that. They're bush-like, and they you harvest them before they get fully mature. So when they're still like tender, where you can actually break their skin with a fingernail. And you can harvest them all summer long. They're really plentiful. Summer squash is as long as you can get to maturity. It's just you just get overwhelmed with how many yellow crook neck squashes and stuff. It's just so plentiful. And you want to cut the stems again with a knife, because they're going to keep on growing. So you don't want to damage that plant by like ripping it off, because you're going to get a lot of harvest from these guys all year long. Winter squashes are kind of like a little bit opposite. They're more vine-like. They grow on vines along the ground, big patches like pumpkin patches and stuff like that. It's great if you can get that off the ground and build really sturdy trellises, but they need to be strong trellises, like not bamboo. Like they need to be really strong, because these things get heavy, and it's nice to give we showed give them like little hammocks and stuff, like pantyhose and stuff to kind of give them a little support for the fruits, but these you want to kind of wait till they fully mature and the rinds get hard. A lot of times they'll get like kind of the colors will get duller and less shiny, but mainly you're waiting for the rind to be so hard that you can't puncture it with your fingernail. And that's really what you want when you want to start harvesting them. And a lot of times they harvest all at once. That's why when you see a pumpkin patch, like you don't see people like a pumpkin patch is around all summer long. It's only in like for a couple of weeks in fall, because that they ripen over a span of a couple of weeks. So. All right, root crops. So now we're going to talk. We'll talk about beets now too. Root crops are really great, convenient crops, because you can kind of just harvest them when you need them. Just pull out a couple carrots every day to eat. You don't need to like harvest all the carrots at once. You just leave them on the ground. They're fine on the ground. They'll keep on growing. Mainly, like you decide when to harvest them, mainly by the tops. You're looking at the diameter of the top. So if that diameter. You can start harvesting most things at almost an inch to about 3 inches is a great area to harvest a lot of things. And some things you could leave in for a while, like carrots, but beets and turnips, you don't want to let them get more than 3 inches in the diameter, because then they'll start getting woody. Like particularly beets, you want to get those when they're like 1 or 2 inches. When they're still very sweet, because you let them get too big, then they're not going to be sweet. They're going to be woody and bitter. And so, like the tops of a lot of these, we're going to talk more about this later in the presentation, but the tops of beets and turnips are really delicious. They're basically like spinach. They're very high in iron and calcium and stuff like that, if you're looking to improve that in your diet. The carrots have very spicy, like kind of parsley-like tops that you can eat as well. Normally we'll talk about storage, but usually when you store things, you want to leave a little bit of green, but you want to cut off most of them, so they don't because the greens will dry out and rot first, and then we'll start rotting the crop unless you cut off that. And we'll talk more about that and how to preserve produce later in the presentation. And then certain things can actually overwinter, like carrots and parsnips do really well overwintering. They're really great winter crops. You plant them in the fall, like August, September, and then or October, probably September at the latest, maybe early October. And then they'll actually get sweeter as like the frost comes. They'll actually convert a lot of the starches to sugars. But you do want to harvest them, throughout the winter, and you don't want to wait too long, because eventually they will get kind of disgusting come like late spring. Got a question. I've harvested carrots and put them in my fridge, and they got limp really fast, like within a day. Yeah, so we'll talk more about like how to store crops later in the presentation. But typically, idea is you want to cut off the tops, but you want to leave a little bit of it. because that keeps it from kind of rotting, drying out too quickly. So you leave like maybe a half inch to an inch of the tops, and that should preserve it a little bit longer. But we'll kind of dive deeper into like all the different ways to preserve. And I kind of need to look at charts for some of these things because I can't keep track of it all. But yeah, we'll definitely dive into that. And then harvesting onions. So onions, I just do not recommend planting onions by seeds, or even starting them yourself. Because I mean, you got to start them in January if you're starting yourself, and they just take so long. What you really want to plant, you want to plant what's called bunches, or basically just onion slips or bulbs. This is going to give you, they're like a big head start on the growing season, and you'll be able to actually produce onions. But a lot of times onions, there are specific seeds for like scallions and spring onions and green onions and small and large. There's definitely specific seeds. Most of the time, it's all kind of the same. And it's just like how you space them out and when you harvest them. Like if you space them really close together, if you want scallions, those are kind of like the herbs that don't have bulbs that you can cut up. They have that onion tasty, mild onion taste. But then if you want smaller bulbs, you got to space them out by 2 inches. And if you want those large, onions that we see in grocery stores, you got to space them out by 4 inches. So depending on what you're going for and how long you're willing to wait. Because like the spring onions, I mean, you can harvest these super quickly. Scallions and green onions, as soon as they're the size of a pencil, they're ready to be harvested. You can cut them at the base. But then small onions and large onions, you gotta wait longer. A lot of times the smaller onions, you may have to harvest them before the tops die back. But the large onions, though, you mainly just wait for, you grow them until they don't grow anymore. And that's usually the indicator, like the tops will start, getting brown, they'll die back. And then that point, you can pull them out. And then, we'll talk about curing them and storing them in a second. But and garlic, so we talked a lot about garlic. Garlic's that weird season where you plant them as like in October, November, and then you harvest them in the beginning of summer in the late June. But with grocery, I recommend not using garlic that you get from the grocery store. Sometimes they're sprayed with things that will keep them from germinating. But sometimes they're fine. I know a lot of people that still do it and do it well. Especially if you buy it from the organic section. But a lot of times I'll order my garlic from like what's that plant that co-op in the Virginia, Southern Exposure. They have really great, garlic varieties. They grow well in the area. Or I'll go down to the farmer's market and I'll get some garlic, that I know is great. Or I'll save some of my garlic from the year before. So, but you want to break them apart into these, into their little cloves. Leave that paper on top of it, and just plant them out. 2 inches deep. Space them out 4 to 5, 6 inches. And you do that in October, cover them up, and then heavily mulch them. And then sometimes they'll sprout in the fall, but sometimes they won't. Don't worry about that. But you want to water them for a while, at least until like November or so. Then they'll go dormant, and then in the spring they'll pop back up. And then continue to water them, continue to keep them mulched and things like that. And then in the early summer, May, early June, they'll send out their flowers. And these are called garlic scapes. And they're super delicious. It's like a mild, tender garlic. You got to get them. It's kind of a timing issue, because if you wait too long to harvest them, they'll get woody and bitter. So you want to. I usually wait till they do like one loop. They'll do a bunch of loops for some reason before they actually the flower opens up. So I usually wait till like one loop, and then I'll either snap them at the base or I'll cut them off, and then it's great. I chop them up and saute them and stuff like that. Throw them in salads. It's really delicious. But then for the initial harvest, is you want to wait till end of June, early July, and you'll notice like that the bottom halves will get brown on your garlic. They'll look like this, and that's a good indicator that you want to pull them out. And you need to cure them too, which we'll talk about in a second. Curing plants. So a lot of times we need to, they're not ready to eat right away. Like sweet potatoes, when you pull them out of the ground, they're mainly just all starch, and they're not sweet at all. So you gotta, because they're a tropical plant and they grew up, they formed needing a certain like kind of like a process where that converts a lot of their starches to sugars. So that's one reason why we cure plants. And then with onions and garlic, we cure them just so they store longer too. Like we build up the outside um, rinds or whatever you call them, the skins, and thicken them out so they'll preserve longer. But with sweet potatoes, so sweet potatoes is a little tricky. This is ideal, but you don't need to because it's do this. But ideally, they're tropical plants. They cure in humid environments. So if you can create some kind of humid environment, like a lot of people throw a tarp over them and leave them in the sun, and that will get humid environment. I always see a lot of my friends that I know that it's time to harvest sweet potatoes because I'll see them in the back of their car on that little ledge in the back of it inside your car on that little ledge behind the back seat underneath the window because that's I guess is a very humid kind of area. Then that will help cure your sweet potatoes. But it's just hard sometimes to create that human space. So if you can, then they'll actually cure really quickly and they'll convert a lot of sugars. But if not, what I do is I just throw them in my basement for a couple months, like 1 or 2 months, and over time they'll convert their starches to sugars. And again, it's like melons. You want to try one before you cook them all up, just to make sure they're sweet enough, or if they need more time. Onions, like onions, like ideally you want to pull them out and just like leave them in the sun for a couple of days and let them kind of dry out a little bit. And then you want to keep them somewhere like in the basement or a tool shed or something like that where you can let them just like spread them out and let them kind of slowly dry on their own, like a nice ventilated area. And then the idea is like the tops will get kind of really dry. And then once the tops are pretty dry, you cut those off and then they'll store like a normal onion. They'll store for a while. Garlic, you bunch them up, hang them, from a ventilated area, like a shed or something. It doesn't have to be, really ventilated, but just some kind of breeze. And I just hang them up for a couple weeks, and then they'll kind of toughen up, and then you can cut off the tops, and that garlic will store for a while if you do that. Tomatoes. So tomatoes, I mean, you can tell when they're ripe. Like you're looking for, like like that. Everyone knows that ripe tomato that just about to burst. That's it's got that aroma to it. It's soft but firm. It's got that bright, red color. And that's great. And you want to ripen tomatoes on the vine. You can sometimes ripen tomatoes that are still green, especially if a little bit is turned, red. You throw them in a paper bag, and they'll ripen on their own. But a lot of times, if there's no red at all, and it's just pretty solid green, sometimes it's hard to get it to finish ripening. But that's why. But if at the end of the season, let's say like there's a frost coming, and your tomato plant's going to die, you can actually rush the ripeness on a lot of them. Like especially if you're like in the fall and you just want to get the last tomatoes ripened because that's when when the sunlight decreases and the temperatures go down a little bit. That's when it's sometimes tough for tomato plants to really ripen. They need that perfect that hot temperatures and then you need that sun exposure. So you can pinch off all the remaining flowers and all the undeveloped tomatoes, and it'll concentrate more energy on the actual tomato to ripen. But if you know there's going to be a frost coming and it's going to kill all your plants, you can actually rip your whole tomato plant out, hang it upside down in like your basement, and then it freaks it out and it will send everything it has to the tomatoes just to finish ripening them. And that's one way to kind of get the last bit of your harvest out. But we're also going to talk about a lot of really great green tomato recipes today too. So if you don't get them all ripe, and there's a lot of great things you can do with green tomatoes. We talked about like different ways to harvest herbs, a lot of ways, especially like with your branching herbs. You're more like kind of soft stem herbs like basil and lemon balm and things like that. You wanna harvest them right away, like as much as possible, almost daily. Because you're essentially pruning them, and you want to harvest just the tips of the branches. Because the idea is you just grow a basil seed from start and just you don't do anything to it. It's just going to be a single stem, and there's not going to be a whole lot of basil. But if you start pinching it, pinch the top leaf off right at the 2 nodules, and then those grow into 2 leaves themselves, and then suddenly you have 2 branches, and you do that to the top of the next set of leaves that next week, maybe once a week you keep on doing this, and then all of a sudden you're going to have this beautiful basil bush with tons of basil to harvest off of. And then like more like non-branching, like more woody perennial stuff like rosemary and like dill that you just want to harvest with a pruner or a really sharp knife or scissors or something. But I really recommend getting like a pair of pruners to harvest this stuff. And the idea is like you only cut, you wait till the branch gets, like, decent size, 4, 5, 6 inches, and you cut off and leave at least a third of the branch, and then if you cut off a bunch of it, you want to leave at least a third of the plant, and they'll keep on rebounding from there. And the more you kind of cut off and prune, you are stimulating more growth as well. But you want yeah. All right, so this is one of my favorite sections. Moving to the next one, the section is called alternative edibles from the garden. So we're going to talk about all different kinds of like fun things that people normally throw away. That I'm going to tell you some cool tips so where you can maximize all the things you can eat in your garden. So we're going to talk about blossoms and root crops and seeds and things like that. So root crop tops. This is a great one. We talked a little bit about this previously, but yeah, most of your root crops, the tops are very edible and super, super delicious. Um, so your beet greens, your beet greens are basically, yeah, like spinach, full of tons of nutrients. And the stalks can be kind of sweet as well. You can do a lot of things with the stalks as well, especially if you cook them down and simmer them. Turnip greens are very mustard-like greens, very similar to like carrots and parsnips, are very spicy. And radishes, radish greens are yeah, very super spicy, very delicious. They taste like kind of like a greenish radish is really, really good. So definitely find different fun ways to, because when you store these, you want to cut them off again and leave it just like an inch or so on top, so they store well. But then don't throw away the greens. Find different fun ways to cook them. Um, so WL New just said she discovered her hostas are edible. That's cool. I've never heard of that before. Yeah, I'll definitely have to look that up. Cool, cool. Oh, and carrot and pear snips and stuff. I mean, I mean, the carrot tops can be pretty spicy. Be a little bitter too. So not a lot of people like them fresh. So, but a lot of people do, make soups and broths out of them. They're really, really delicious. So here's some great recipes for carrot tops and celery top pestos and stuff. So I'm gonna have different recipes throughout this presentation. I'm not going to go through the recipes, but just kind of this is just for if you want to try stuff out. And blossoms. One of my favorite blossoms out there is squash blossoms. So we talked a little bit about like how difficult how squashes typically don't have great pollination because they have male and female pot flowers, and a lot of times if you just plant one squash plant, they open up at different times and it's just bad. That's why a lot of people will plant multiple squash plants, or you can hand pollinate them, where when you start seeing a lot of the female flowers that have they have the ovaries on the bottom, and when they start opening up, you could grab a male flower, cut off the stem, tear off the petals, and just kind of stick it and pollinate each one of the female flowers. And once you do that, you should have like perfect pollination. But then you have a bunch of male flowers left over, and you can cut those male flowers off. I love like stuffing them full of like ricotta cheese and baking them and drizzling honey on them. A lot of people frying them up as fritters, and tacos and things like that. It really, really delicious. Garlic scapes, we talked about garlic scapes as well, but grabbing those after the first loop and getting them before they get woody. Borage is this really beautiful blue flower. I love borage. It's a great way to attract pollinators. It's a great, I believe it's native, but you can actually pull the blue leaves off and you can eat them fresh. They're really sweet, or you can put them in salads and things like that. And then marigolds. So marigolds are very are edible. A lot of people there's not a whole lot you can do with them. They're kind of tangy, a little bitter, but you can deep fry them, and having like marigold fritters and stuff like that are really, really delicious. So someone says, can you plant pepper from seeds? You can, but it takes a really long time. For a pepper plant, I would definitely recommend either growing your own seedling, which you need to start like a month ago, or at this point I would buy a pepper plant seedling, because you can plant a seed in the ground in mid-May, but you're not going to get a harvest till the end of the summer because it's going to take so long. So I would definitely recommend buying a seedling, a pepper seedling. Let's see, anything you can do with borage leaves? I'm not really sure. I just know the petals. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, you could probably definitely look that up, but I don't know about that. But the petals, the petals are super delicious. This is a bummer because it's such a beautiful flower that you gotta. Yes, you got to decide, do you want, things to look good or things to taste good? Yeah. Then there's a whole bunch of other great blossoms that you can eat out, like violet and pansies are really high in demand. Like a lot of like you see these in a lot of like really high end restaurants and stuff. A lot of times like pansies are really great, like kind of floral taste in mixing flowers, and violets are often used in like pastries and stuff like that. They have more of a sweet taste to them. But you want to be careful when we start getting into these more like these like roses and pansies and violets. You want to be careful with some of these things and make sure you're not harvesting from an area that's using pesticides and stuff like that. So what you do want to be, careful about what, just where you can harvest them. Rose petals, again, like they could be anywhere from sweet to spicy depending on the varieties and stuff. There's a lot of things you can do with them. One thing I've been loving lately, I just discovered is like rose hips. So the rose flower, once they're done flowering, all the petals drop, and then they're left, and then there's a little fruit that forms and they're called rose hips. And you can wait till like usually fall, in late in fall is when they start appearing, and you can eat them fresh. But they're delicious. But a lot of people will make jams and jellies and soups and stuff, and they got a huge amount of vitamin C. They're really really healthy for you. But again, you just want to make sure don't just start going around the neighborhood picking roses off, because a lot of people use a lot of pesticides and herbicides or pesticides and stuff for roses, because they can be a little bit tricky to grow. So you want to make sure you know where you're picking from. And then the last one, nasturtiums. Nasturtiums are super delicious, spicy. You can eat the leaves and flowers. And I wouldn't have a whole salad full of nasturtiums, but mixing them up in a salad with lettuce and stuff is really, really delicious. I say, do you need to cook them? Which one are you talking about, Paula?
The rose hips. The rose hips.
Well, I would say like most of these things, you probably don't need to cook them at all. You can eat them fresh. Rose hips. I mean, I've eaten rose hips fresh. If you get them just right, they're really delicious. But yeah, I've never actually processed them. That's something that I would probably look up. I'm not really sure how to make them. I imagine you probably do need to cook them down to if you're making jellies and sauces and stuff like that. But yeah, that's definitely something. Yeah, I would do a little research on, but I'm not entirely sure. Then there's a couple other blossoms to look out for. We talked a little bit about this, like, but when your brassicas, particularly your kale, your plants, when they're done producing, they'll bolt, which they'll send out their own flower, and then like the plant gets super bitter at that point, and you don't really want to harvest kale leaves once they bolt. But then normally when people see that, they rip the plant out. But if you before you rip it out, I would cut out that bolt. That's actually a really delicious kind of like broccoli rabe kind of thing. That's really great to like saute with some garlic. And the arugula has really great bolts. They're very very peppery, more spicy bolts. Chive blossoms, you can actually kind of like a mildly onion taste. Chives are a kind of a perennial kind of like herbal, like kind of onion herb kind of tasting. But you can actually like again like you can a lot of people make fritters out of them. You can fry them up, saute them, and things like that. One of my favorite things right now, and you can go out and find these right now, are redbud trees. We have redbuds all over DC, and they have these really beautiful pink flowers that are edible. They're sweet. They're kind of like a mixture of a sweet floral kind of taste. I usually make like a redbud salad during Easter. Again, I wouldn't make a whole salad of redbuds, but I mean you can mix them up with a normal salad, and it's really delicious. A lot of people will bake at it. They'll make cakes and stuff. They'll just they'll mix in the redbud flowers and cakes and pastries and things, and that will give like a little bit of a sweet floral taste to their cakes. Like yeah, I've had a couple of redbud cakes and they're really delicious. Here's some great recipes on squash blossom frittata, super delicious. Stalks and stems. So again, we talked about broccoli. Every part of a broccoli is edible, and it's really delicious as well. I actually prefer, like I love the stalks. If you're eating the stalks raw, though, you want to kind of like peel out you can either get a peeler or just kind of pull off the outside. It's more of a woody, harder stuff, and you want the inside stalk, which is like a very more tender. It's got like a chestnutty kind of taste to it, like a nutty taste to it. It's really good. But you can also like stir fry it, broth it, pickle it, stuff like that. Same with chard stalks. When you rip off, we're gonna show how to actually rip off the leaves. With these later, you'll have leftover stalks. And you can do a lot of things with it. My favorite thing is like the best substitute for chickpeas for hummus. If you make a hummus instead of using chickpeas, you want to kind of boil the stalks first, boil them down, and then puree them, and then mix them in. And I think it's better than chickpea hummus. It's so good. It's so creamy. Um, and then if you're growing fennel, a lot of times people grow fennel because they want that fennel part that they do. It's mainly, but then they throw away the stalks and the fronds. The fronds are like the fuzzy. I'm not lack of better words, like the fuzzy parts on the top of the stalks. But you can do a lot with these. You can make like broths and stuff out of them. You can bake them, things like that. So I've never actually, some of these things I haven't like I don't grow a lot of fennel, but yeah, definitely there's a lot of great recipes online for things that you could do with that. So this is chard stalk hummus. Yeah, I'm for real. This is like if you're growing chard, definitely save the stalks and make some hummus out of it. It's so good. Usually when we do these classes, we actually do some of these things, and this is one of the things that we'll always make. And this is a big hit. Broccoli stem pesto. So yeah, broccoli stem makes really, really great pesto. So just instead of using basil, you just substitute the broccoli stalks, and it's much more like a nuttier kind of pesto. Then leaves. Yeah, like Brussels sprouts we talked about. They're basically collard leaves. I mean, this is a collard plant, and this is a Brussels sprout plant. I mean, they even look exactly the same. So you definitely want to, as you pull them off, just treat them as collards, and saute them up and things like that. Sweet potato leaves are really, really good. They're like spinach like. The thing about sweet potato leaves is you don't want to harvest too much of them. You want to harvest a little bit at a time, just so it's still a mature plant. So it's still like maturing its actual sweet potatoes in the ground. But you can definitely harvest a handful of leaves because they're so plentiful that you're not going to mind harvesting a handful couple handfuls every week. Or once if you do harvest the sweet potatoes, like before the frost hits, and then the greens and the leaves are still green, you can definitely eat those. Broccoli leaves, and cauliflower leaves are really great. We do a lot of roasting them. I'll have a slide on how to roast different things and stuff. So those are really delicious leaves. Um, um, Definitely like roasting them. And then a lot of times if you like if you harvest like greens and let's say you did it in the middle of the summer, the hot day, which we urge if you're harvesting, try to do it in the morning or on a shady day or in the evening. Don't do it when that sun's the hottest because a lot of times the greens will wilt. And you can kind of revive them if you throw them in ice water for temporarily, but a lot of times, though, if they just wilt, one great thing you can do is you can make pesto out of those wilted greens. So you don't have to throw them away. You can find different ways to use them. All right, so a couple of sweet potatoes and regular leaves are delicious. Use them as you would with spinach. Cool, yeah, yeah. I love sweet potato leaves. Oh, here's good. Can you use beet stalks to make hummus as well? That's a good question because they look very similar. I've never done it, but I would. Yeah, I would definitely. I bet you could. If you actually did try it out and it works out well, let me know how that goes. I learned that rhubarb leaves are poisonous. Are there other veggies I should be careful with harvesting? Yeah, there are some things that I would stay away from, like particularly like anything in the nightshade family, like tomatoes, potatoes. So sweet potatoes is not like is a different thing than a normal potato. So I wouldn't eat normal potato leaves. I wouldn't eat anything from a tomato plant that's not an actual tomato. There's probably some other ones too, but yeah, you definitely want to make sure you verify that this is good to eat before you don't be the test subject and trying things out. But I would say anything in the nightshade family, like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, stay away from those leaves and stalks and things. Pea shoots. So pea shoots are essentially like you're just basically harvesting the pea shoot vines and stalks. They're like you can eat any part of the pea plant. The leaves and stuff have a bit of a more nuttier, pea like taste. Is really delicious. A lot of people will grow them as microgreens. So you can if you're growing your normal peas. And you want pea pods, you can still every one maybe once a week you can harvest a couple of them. a handful. The idea is you want to try to get like one or two sets of leaves. These are actually like I wouldn't harvest this long. It's really when I do it, it's only about like 4 or 5 inches. You want to wait till the peas are at least like 6 or 8 inches or a foot tall, and then you snap off the tips of the pea vines. So you'll hopefully have a bunch of them, and you'll snap off the tips. 2 to 4 inches. Try to get one or two pairs of leaves, and then cut off the last one right before the leaf that you're leaving. And that's it's also pruned to plant too. You'll have much of a bushier kind of a pea plant if you do this. But the thing is, you don't want to do too much because then it's not going to have enough nutrients to actually form the peas and grow properly. That's why some people will grow certain peas just for the pods, and then other people will grow, and then they'll have another pea plant that they'll just harvest really hard for all summer long or all spring, until it bolts. So they'll have two different ones if they want pods, and they will then and also have shoots. Some people also do microgreens where they'll grow them in containers inside, really dense like, and they'll just like they'll just harvest them really heavy on the top to keep them from growing too big, and they'll get a lot of microgreens from that. So here's the recipes for sauteed sweet potato greens. Lots of different ways you can cook them up, but they're really, really delicious. A recipe for roasted cauliflower broccoli leaves. Really, yeah. I'm just gonna say really delicious, probably for everything. I mean, I'm only putting recipes that I've tried that are really delicious. Sauteed beet crop tops with salads. You can make out of them with balsamic syrup. Then seeds. So a lot of plants will have some seeds that you can use. Nasturtiums actually, once they flower and then the petals drop off, they'll start forming seeds at the tip. And you can actually pickle these, and they call them the poor man's capers. They actually taste very similar to like pickled nasturtiums taste very similar to capers. So so if you don't want to spend all the money on capers, yeah, it's a great way to get some free capers. And then cilantro. So coriander. If you ever see coriander spice, it's basically cilantro seeds. So this is a cilantro, and they dry off at the end. You basically want to wait. Cilantro, as soon as it gets hot, they'll die back, and then and things will dry off, maybe like June or so. And then you cut off the base, cut off these whole thing, cut it out of the stalk, and then you put it in a paper bag, and you just kind of shake it up once a day, and you just wait until all the seeds fall off. And then once you have the seeds, you can dry them out, store them in jars. And there's a lot of different recipes and stuff you can do with them. And same with like mustard seeds, it's a very similar process. And then fennel pollen, you can actually capture fennel pollen. And a lot of people use that for. I've never actually done it, but they use it for different spices and things like that. So this is a recipe for making the poor man's capers, so nasturtium seeds. Pickling. So we're gonna. There's a lot of great things that you can pickle, like watermelon rinds. We're gonna talk about pickling and stuff and fermenting and stuff later in the presentation. But yeah, pickled watermelon rinds are really fantastic, especially if you follow a recipe. Like this is a really great recipe. Same with that, you can pickle broccoli stalks. Work really well. You can pickle chard stalks. And then green tomatoes, again, like if your green tomato, if it's not a little, if it's not starting to turn a little bit, it's really hard to turn them once off the vine, especially towards the fall when there's just not enough sun or heat to get them ripened. So there's a lot of really great recipes for green tomatoes, like making chutneys, salsas are really great, even sweet. We used to do cooking classes where we would make green tomato muffins and things like that. Really good. Like the moisture actually makes the whole muffin a lot more moist, and it's really good. Then broth is a great one. So if you just have a bunch of leftover things, like onion peels, cabbage leaves, and stuff, and one way, a lot of people will save all that stuff. Every time they cook, they'll save all the leftover stuff and they'll put it in their freezer bag, and then once they have enough, they'll make a broth out of it. They'll just cook it all down, and it makes a really great veggie broth. So there's really like even stuff that you can't really do much with. You can just throw it in you can still make a broth out of it, like a And then edible garden weeds. So a lot of actually some of the most healthiest things in your garden are your weeds. Like purslane. Purslane is kind of like a succulent weed, and it's actually got the highest level of omega-3 fatty acids than any other plant I've ever found. Super healthy. You just want to make sure again when we're harvesting these weeds, they come from your garden and not from some place that like dogs are going to pee on or things like that. So like same with like dandelions, or definitely recommend like harvesting dandelions in the spring before they start flowering. Dandelion is already bitter by itself, but it'll get much more bitter once it starts flowering. And a lot of people, I mean, they'll eat their leaves, but there's a big, kind of chunky part in the middle that's really tender that you can saute up. It's really delicious. Lamb's quarter is kind of like a spinach-like plant that you can, that's really delicious, and it just grows like crazy. Dead nettle, like when you see like really beautiful fields of purple dead nettle, people make, a dead nettle pestos and stuff out of them. Again, I wouldn't have like a whole salad full of lamb's quarter or dead nettle, but you can mix it kind of up, and it's pretty delicious. And chickweed. Um, so chickweed, a lot of people will make pestos and stuff out of chickweed, and it's really good. But again, like you want to be able to be 100% sure whenever you're like foraging stuff or like picking stuff up. You want to be 100% sure, and if you're not sure, don't eat it. If you're not sure if this is a dead nettle plant or not, and you can't properly identify it, or you don't have someone that can help you, when in doubt, don't eat it. Very simple, but I mean, you're going to start recognizing these things, and that, at this point, after you garden for a couple of years, like these are going to be, it's going to be pretty easy to identify these things. Yeah, warning, the dandelion leaves are good, but super bitter for sure. Yeah, I remember my mom making dandelion wine. Yeah, yeah. There was a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people make wines and stuff. A lot of people still do make wines out of dandelions and things like that. So yeah, definitely something. I mean, if you want a recipe, just you can Google it. That's really cool. And then like when in doubt, like if you're not sure what to do with it, make it a green smoothie. Blend it all up, or juice it, and then add some like apples or something, to kind of give it a little bit more flavoring. All right, so now we're going to talk about a couple cooking techniques. There's a lot of cooking techniques out there. Definitely let me know if there's ones that I should probably include in this presentation. I would love to hear it. But yeah, we're just going to talk about just some basic things that so just to give you some more ideas of things you can do with what you grow. The biggest one is like when you grow greens, you need to wash your greens. You need to wash them, not only wash them, but then you need to make sure they're super dry, because if you don't dry them off, they're going to rot really quickly. And most things you don't wash. We're going to talk about storage and proper storage and stuff. But most things you don't wash until you're ready to eat them, like an apple, because then you could start triggering pain processes or whatever. But like leaves are one of those things that you want to wash. As soon as you harvest them, as soon as you bring them in, you wash them, and then dry them really quickly. So you can wash them in a colander under like cool water, or really, if you plan on growing a lot of your own greens, I definitely recommend investing in a salad spinner. They're pretty cheap, and what they are is basically there's a cauldron, or what I think that's why you call it the thing, that a strainer or whatever, that's in the middle, and then there's a large bowl, and you fill it up with water. You kind of massage it and swirl it a little bit, wash it, and then you empty that. You pull the strainer out, and you empty the water and put it back in, and there's a top that you can spin, and it will spin dry it. And that's like the best way. I mean, it's super easy. They get dry super quickly, and then they'll store really nicely. You can put them in a plastic bag and store them in a refrigerator from there, or a sealed container. If not, if you don't have one of these, you could just dry them out in paper towels and tea towels and stuff like that. Massaging kale. So a lot of times kale is just a lot of like the brassicas. They're just if you just eat them raw, like it can upset a lot of people's stomachs. They're not as sweet, so there's certain things that you can do to kind of process them a little bit more. This is the best trick. When you have big leaves, if you want to pull them off, the idea is you kind of grab them by the base, and you just run your hand down, and it just pulls off all the leaves, and then you're left with a stalk. This is great for chard. This is great for kale and things like that. But then once you have that stuff, you can do some things to kind of help it release some sugars and soften up, and actually be a little bit more easy for you to digest. And a lot of things, big ones like massaging your kale, and that's where you just you'll add a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of salt, whatever spices you want, and just gently massage it, kind of like kneading dough. You don't want to get too crazy where you just pulverize it, but you want it to maintain its like leaf form. But you just want to gently massage it for a couple minutes, and then that's going to like release sugars. It's going to tenderize it and things like that. Or if you don't want to massage it, you can actually pour some lemon juice on it and just store it overnight in the fridge, and that will like kind of slowly break it down and massage it. Do the same results as well. Then sauteing greens again, like a lot of these greens are just it's just harsh on the stomach to eat a lot of these things raw. Definitely recommend learning how to saute some good greens. And this is really easy. You just fill up your pan full of leaves. You put some kind of like some kind of olive fatty oil like olive oil in there. Add whatever garlic, red peppers, lemon flakes, whatever, and just salt. Cook it, and you're basically just cooking it down. Until you have a nice sauteed greens, and then you can add cheese, pine nuts, vinegars, all different kinds of things. Definitely, if you're growing greens, you should have a good some good saute recipes. Roasting. So I feel like I've just gotten just kind of introduced to this new world of roasting, and like roasting vegetables is the best. They're so delicious. They just bring out so many amazing flavors that like I'm kind of obsessed with roasting. And roasting's super easy. It's just like putting temperature. I mean, look at a recipe. But it's usually a high temperature. Put it on the baking sheet. Just like you can line it with parchment paper, aluminum foil, or grease, oil it. A lot of times, if you're using a recipe that already has oil, you don't need to put anything on the pan, and you just kind of bake it in the oven for a while on high heat. And you make kale chips are super delicious. Root vegetables, like roasted carrots and beets and stuff are so delicious. I've just been getting into like cabbage and cauliflower lately. Like, roasted cabbage is so delicious, and there's some amazing recipes out there where you can put like lemon juices and on it, and like different kinds of like nut toppings and Parmesan cheese and stuff. It's so good. And this cauliflower, especially if you have young kids, our 3-year-old is just obsessed with roasted cauliflower. We roast them with like fennel seeds. Oh, it's so good. You just drizzle a little olive oil, a little salt and pepper, and then add whatever you want. And our kid thinks it's popcorn. Literally, she calls it popcorn, and she just can't get enough of it. It's so good. You just roast it until it turns brown, basically. Broccoli, the same. Roasted broccoli leaves and cauliflower leaves and stuff. Or just roasted broccoli florets, just roasted just like cauliflower. Squash too. You can make squash savory or sweet. Like a lot of people will roast acorn squash, where they'll cut it in half, kind of hollow it out, and then put like brown sugar and butter and stuff, and roast it for like a savory one. Or you can make it olive oil and for a sweet one. But really, yeah, I can't. Yeah, roasting is awesome. It's so delicious. Veggie noodles. So if you want to, you're looking for like, let's say if you're looking for a gluten-free, or just like a good, healthier substitute for wheat pastas. Spaghetti squash. The idea is you just cut it in half. You bake it. You kind of scrape out the seeds. With some olive oil, bake it for a while. And then you can just kind of take a spoon and you just kind of, pull out all on the insides, just look like, regular spaghetti, I mean, it's a little bit, it's not quite like spaghetti. It's a little bit tougher, but you can still treat it like spaghetti. Like, I love this. And I'll add, pasta sauce and Parmesan cheese on top or something like that. And it's just really, really good. And like zucchini and stuff, you can get a spiralizer that will actually spiralize your noodles, and you can treat that. Again, it's not exactly like pasta, but it's still pretty good. Shredding veggies. So this is a big thing that a lot of people do. One reason they do it is it's just, again, like eating like a lot of like carrots and stuff. It can be kind of tough on your stomach, but when you shred it, it makes it a lot easier to digest. Like, I love shredded carrots in a salad. It's so good. So you can shred them for salads, for toppings. Baking is really good. Like, a lot if you're making zucchini bread or carrot cake, you shred this stuff, zucchini and stuff, and it adds moisture. That's why these things, zucchini bread's so moist, because it's adding moisture to the bacon. And you're making like coleslaw, garnishes, hash browns, things like that. Sometimes you don't use, you usually grate for most things, but for like cabbages and stuff, you want an iceberg lettuce, you want to use a knife. Don't try to shred a cabbage. into the in the grater. So big fan of mandolin to make shredding and slicing easier. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Definitely check out mandolins or mandolin if I'm saying that right. Yeah. Garden stir fries. Yeah, I mean they're pretty simple. I don't need to. Yeah. This is straight from like. So these last two things are straight from articles. So if I that you could. I mean, it's I literally cut and paste it. So you can look at the whole article and it has some great recipes for stir fries. But the idea with stir fries, I mean, you can have a giant wok, great, but you could just use a normal pan and you kind of chop everything up at first, and then you cook your oils. You don't use olive oil. You got to use like a high, smoking point oil because olive oil will start smoking once it gets so hot, like corn or canola, peanut oil, and then you throw your herbs in there first, and then you kind of infuse it, and then you add your veggies, and that infuses the flavors, into your veggies and kind of cook them and add the big things first. If you're using meats, you want to like brown, get cooked meat somewhat before you throw it in there and things like that. So there's a lot of different, recipes you could check out for stir fries. If you're making tomato sauces, so this is just a basic tomato sauce. You can get crazy with all the different things you can do with tomato sauces, but basically, how you make a potato sauce. Like you choose your like aromas and are great tomatoes, but you can really make a sauce out of just about any tomato. The first thing you want to do is blanch it, and we'll talk more about blanching. But basically, you want to cut out the tops, the root part, and then you make an X on the bottom of the tomato, and then you blanch it, which is basically throwing it in hot water, or boiling water for a couple minutes, and then throwing it in ice water for a couple minutes, and that kind of that loosens the skin, and then you can pull all the skins off, blend the skins, then put or blend the tomatoes, throw away the skins, and then put that in a sauce and cook it and add your spices. If you're going to can it, like you're going to preserve it for a while, you want to add like lemon juice and vinegar and stuff that will help preserve that stuff. Um, and then blanching. So blanching, a lot of people use a lot of reasons why people do blanch. One of the biggest ones is if you're going to store food, if you're in like especially in the freezer. Blanching it, it's basically like said you dunk it in some boiling water for a few minutes, and then you dunk it in ice water for a few minutes, and that it slows down a lot of the enzymes in there that's going to deteriorate things. So it'll store quicker. People will do that before they freeze veggies because it will store a lot quicker. It will preserve the taste and the color is a lot better. A lot of people will do it if they want like peaches. If they weren't trying to remove tomato skins or peach skins, like if you're making a peach cobbler, you want to get rid of the skins instead of hand peeling them. They'll come off real easy. Blanching, and sometimes people just do it just to make it in the food look better because it'll really like define the colors and the taste and stuff. Once Sophia says, "Don't the tomato skins have a lot of nutrients?" Well, yeah, probably. Actually, that's something I've never really researched. But yeah, I would love to hear if you guys want to look up some things that you can do with tomatoes, or let me know. That I would love to add that to the slide. Because that would be a shame. Just throw away a lot of because a lot of times like potatoes and stuff. Most of the not most of them, but a lot of the nutrients are stored in the skin. So yeah, I would love to hear about if anyone now or even in the future if you have things to do. Oh, you can puree the skins. Cool. Yeah, yeah, and kind of I guess make like a sauce. For sure. Um, all right. So the last section. Again, like if anyone's got extra like cooking techniques and stuff, I would love to hear it or email it to me. I would love to add to that to that section. But last section I'm going to talk about is like preserving our food. So how do we make our food last as long as possible? Um, and one way is just understanding how you store, certain things, are best stored in refrigerators. Certain things are best stored on and not in refrigerators on counters. Certain things are stored, by itself in like a cabinet and closet. So it's really about understanding like the best way to store stuff. And this stuff, I mean, it's sometimes, I mean, this is why I have like some infographics because I just can't remember all this stuff. Sometimes I have to look things up beforehand. A good thing though is like however, if they're being stored in the grocery store, most times is how you want to store them at home. Like if it's in the refrigerated aisle, or if it's you might want to refrigerate it. If it's being out in the open, and you probably want to keep it in the counter. Main thing you want to do is you don't want to wash your food until you're ready to eat it, unless it's like lettuce or spinach or stuff, But you want to, for most things, you don't want to wash them until you're ready to actually cook them or eat them. And then it's good to separate fruits and vegetables, and I try to have them because usually in most refrigerators there's two, produce drawers. You want to keep them separate because a lot of fruits have what's called ethylene, and tomatoes have this too. That they'll release these, it's like a ripening gas. So if you store this next to a bunch of veggies, you may over ripen them and start rotting them really quickly. So you want to keep these things separate. I mean, it doesn't have to be crazy separate. Just keep them not next to each other. Same with tomatoes. Well, first you never want to put a tomato in the refrigerator. You want to store tomatoes on your counters. But if you store them next to things, they're gonna they release off of gases. So it's sometimes nice to kind of keep them in their own little space. Um, and then like you want to remove like any rubber bands, ties, anything that's just going to cause some damage and because that's going to increase rotting. Leafy ends like carrots and stuff. You want to trim the leaves off, but leave about an inch. Because that will keep them from drying out and hopefully softening. Hopefully that's what happened when there was that comment about the carrots being stored and getting too softly or getting soft. But it could be a lot of reasons why that happened, but a lot of times, if people leave the leaf ends or they cut it too often, too short, poking holes in bags, things like that. You don't want, you want circulation for a lot of these things. And fruits, so a lot of these things, if you just look at these graphics, these are good things. Like these are things that you want to keep on the counters, like garlic and eggplants and stuff, and bananas on the counter, but then broccoli and carrots and artichokes and beets, you go in the refrigerator. Some things and some things are versatile, like apples. If I just have a couple apples, I keep them on the counter. I feel like they will continue ripening and getting sweeter on the counter. But if I have a lot of apples that I'm not going to be able to eat before they rot, I'll stick the apples in the fridge, half of them in the refrigerator, half of them on the counter, and kind of rotate. So it's not like a clear science. It's some balancing and things like that happening. But I mean that's why I put this graphic up, because I just can't keep everything straight. And then if you have a really cool root cellar, so this is when people build basements and they design it in a way where they use like there's a static temperatures. Once you get below like 3 feet in the ground, it's like a pretty consistent temperature, and they actually use that to store crops. There's a whole science to it. I'm not really familiar with it, but this is a really great book if you want to get into like root cellars and as a way to preserve your veggies. And then freezing. So freezing is a great way to like store your food for a long time. I mean, you could store a lot of foods for frozen for like I mean at least a year. I mean even longer than a year. They'll start deteriorating, quality and taste, but they can preserve the taste for at least a year. But it temporarily stops the bacteria that's in the enzymes and stuff that's breaking down. But a lot of times though, even though it'll preserve the taste and the nutrients and the health benefits, a lot of the texture, you lose the texture. It just doesn't, like you put an apple in the freezer and then pulling it out, it's not going to be that crisp apple. I mean, so that's why a lot of people, when they freeze veggies and stuff, they mainly do that for stuff that they know they're going to cook or they're going to blend in smoothies or things like that. So you want to like keep them in airtight containers as much as possible. You want to push out the air. You want to, as much as possible. If you have containers, fill it up to the rim. If you have bags, really squeeze that air out, because that extra air is going to, kind of deteriorate the fruit over time slowly. Avoid putting things that aren't ripe yet, because they're not going to really turn ripe. You want to ripen things first and then kind of store them. And then when you thaw them out, don't thaw them out on the counter. Thaw them out in the refrigerator. They just thaw a lot better that way. If you're storing vegetables, you want to kind of like trim off, wash them, trim everything, like the stalks and stuff off. And then it's good to blanch them. If you could blanch them, that's really going to preserve like the texture and the color and the taste and flavors and stuff. So blanch them and then store them but never store like leafy greens. Don't store really well. Herbs like leafy herbs like basil, by themselves they don't store. They don't freeze very well. So a lot of people will freeze them in ice cubes. They can either use water or you can use like olive oil or something like that, and it'll store really well. And then fruits freeze really well. If you got some small things, You can try to freeze them first on like a cookie sheet if there's room, like berries, and then once they're frozen, you can put them in a container so they don't all squish. But yeah, I've been really into lately. I've been making what's called banana ice cream, where it's just you freeze bananas in the freezer and then blend them up and add like nut butters and stuff like that, and they taste just like ice cream. It's so good. If you're looking for like a healthier, it's still high in sugar, but if you're looking for a healthier, like lower fat, ice cream substitute, definitely try that out. But the problem is, it's like the frozen bananas, they'll turn brown, they'll start rotting after like a couple weeks. But I've just been experimenting. Like if you add things like ascorbic acid, like vitamin C or lemon juice to that, they'll store a lot better. That'll keep them from like browning or deteriorating. Yeah, pawpaw ice cream for sure. Yeah, if you're into pawpaw, I love pawpaw ice cream. So it's the same concept, just freeze it and then blend it and then add whatever adding ingredients that you want. Um, Dehydration. So this is when you actually pull. Oh, so the bacteria that breaks down all these crops, I mean, they need water to survive. So if you're able to pull all that water out, it will preserve these crops for a long time. So again, like wash and cut them, blanch them if possible. You don't have to, but I mean, it will preserve some of the color and taste and stuff. Dehydrate. And then the idea when you dehydrate them is you're giving some kind of method. You're providing airflow and gentle heat. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can, do a lot of DIY, systems. We made one, like we used to have these garden open houses, and we made like a dehydrator out of just some cardboard, and some reflection, tinfoil and stuff. And then we would like, pick strawberries, and then put them in there. And then like 2 or 3 hours later, they wouldn't be like, they're not completely dehydrated, but it would be like a fruit roll up kind of like strawberry. It's so delicious. So you can make a lot of your own systems. If you get into it really seriously, I would recommend buying a food dehydrator. There's different, there's ones that trays or different levels and things. You can also do it in your oven. If you crack your oven at 145 degrees and rotate it a lot. But once they're dehydrated, you want to store, or you can sun dry them, like put them on or air dry them, just put them on sheets in the sun, or just let them, hang them like herbs and let them hang in a place that's got some circulation, and that's going to dry out. And then you want to kind of put them in glass jars and Ziploc bags and stuff once they're dehydrated. And preserving her herbs. So we talked a little bit about this already, but most herbs, yeah, you want to dry them out if you're going to preserve them. I mean, if you're going to eat them fresh, don't worry about this. But if you're going to preserve them, for a while, you want to dry them out. Either hang them up upside down or dehydrate them, or a whole bunch of number. I think most people will hang them. And then when they're dried, you want cut off all the stems and everything, put them in glass jars, and they should preserve for a while. And a lot of stuff like that blossoms, like basil flowers and stuff, are pretty delicious as well that you can dry out. But if you want to freeze them, there's other ways you can either freeze them, like we said, in ice cubes, or if you infuse them in like oils or vinegars, that will preserve a lot of these herbs for a long time. Um, and then pickling and fermenting. So quick pick, so if fermenting takes a little bit more, that's a little bit more planning. I think pickling is a little bit easier to do. But you definitely want to follow recipes when you're doing this stuff. It's particularly like with canning stuff. If we're gonna like process, if you want pickles that are going to last a year in your cupboard, you need to follow a recipe, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But a lot of times, if you're just going to, you're just going to preserve them in your refrigerator for a couple months, you can kind of experiment. A lot of that's just like, everyone knows about cucumber pickles, but like carrots and like cauliflower and peppers and stuff, you can pickle anything. And that's just like, you just want a vinegar that's got at least a 5% acidity. Like balsamic vinegar is not that strong. You need like a stronger vinegar, and just fill it completely up, spice it. And like I said, if you keep it in the refrigerator, it's good for a couple months. It's probably good longer. It just starts to get soggy. But if you're going to can it, we'll talk more about that. You definitely need to follow a recipe just to make sure it's good for a year or so. And then fermenting, very similar with fermentation process. Here's a really great pickle recipe for fermenting. When you're doing pickling cucumbers and things, you want to try to find things that are exactly, very similar to the size. You don't want to have different size cucumbers, because it just doesn't. You can fit a lot more pickles when they're in the same size. And you soak them in ice water. That will make them crisper. And fill up a jar full of your pickles and whatever spices you want to put, fennel seeds, peppercorns, all garlic, things like that. A lot of times, but with fermenting, you have to add tannins, or the cucumbers will start getting soft, and that's fine if they get soft. But if you want that crispiness, you can add tannins, and I've researched, like, people will add bay leaves or grape leaves or things like that, and that will like leach out some of the tannins. And then you make a brine, which is like a saltwater solution of like different solutions, but half 1.5 teaspoons per cup of water. Want it to be like unprocessed sea salt, unchlorinated, filtered water, as much as possible. If you use the tap water, I mean, you could let tap water sit, and like chlorine and stuff or whatever will escape. Sometimes if they use solutions where it doesn't work, so you may want to you'll find bottled water or use filters or something that's going to filter out any kind of chlorine. And you just pour that brine over there. And the really important part is you want to you don't want any pickles to be outside of the brine. So a lot of people will get like they'll find different ways to weigh down. It's like a lot of people use like river rocks and stuff like that. So you put that in there, and it kind of pushes everything under the water, because you want things to ferment. And if it needs to be under the water where there's no oxygen to actually ferment. And then you seal it up, but you seal it up too tightly with one of those lids, the twist lids, and then you just let it chill in your basement for a couple of days until hopefully you start seeing signs of life. Because what fermentation is, basically you're making probiotic, like live probiotic solutions and stuff. So you're looking for like bubbles and cloudy water and stuff, once you start seeing that, you put it in the refrigerator, and that will kind of slow down the fermentation, so you can drink, you can eat it before it gets like too fermented. But really with this stuff, you really want to follow recipes on fermentation. You don't, and do a little research on things to look for when they don't go right. And most of the time, it's not that big of a deal if you're just going to eat it, over the next couple of weeks. But if you're planning on storing things for a long time, you definitely want to follow recipes really well. And that's really when it comes to canning. So this is something where if you want to actually store these things, you want to make sauces and pickle things and fermented things, or things that I don't know if you can ferment it, but like pickled things that you want to store for years. This is where canning comes through. And I'm just going to give you a quick little overview of just basically what canning is. But we're actually going to have we have this awesome canning teacher that's going to be teaching this summer with us, Regina Anderson. She's like the head of the Food Recovery Networks, and she's been teaching canning recipes with us for a while. So that's going to happen. So I definitely recommend checking that out, or just doing your research. Like canning, it's not something to be scared of, but it's also something that you need to like follow the recipe, just to make sure everything works out right, or else things aren't going to last that long. So canning, you need like there's two different kinds of canning. It's called water bath or pressure cooker. Water bath is what most people do. It's just getting a giant pot and you just boil water, and then you have this tray that hangs on the outsides, and then you put your jars full of whatever you're canning, sauces and stuff. You have special tools, to fill up the can, and special tools to put the water in and take it out. And the idea is when you're doing it, you got to keep it, make sure everything's sanitized. And then you cook things for a while. It sanitizes everything, but also it releases this air, because when you twist the lids on top of the jars, they say it's finger tight. You don't want to like crank it tight. You just want to twist it till it's on, and then leave it there, because the air will actually escape from these twist lids. When that actually was what creates a seal. Once all the air in the solution escapes, it actually creates this vacuum seal, and that's why on the top, most of the times when you do it right, it'll have like a little ding sound over where it comes indented, and that's a great way to tell if you did it right or not. Is when you pull them all out. If you kind of push it on the middle of the lid, and if it has like some give, if you can push it in and out, then it didn't seal right, and that's fine. I mean, that just means you need to eat it over the next couple of weeks in the refrigerator. It's not going to last. But if it's concave, whatever, if it's already pushed in, then you have a tight seal, and that's what's going to keep it sealed tight, and it's going to store it for years, if you do it right. And then but the idea is like you want to do things, water bathing, like things like acidic things that have jams and jellies and tomatoes and stuff. Things that don't have acidic, like meats and things. You need a pressure cooker that's going to, really sanitize everything. But yeah, I've never really done much pressure cooking, so mainly this is kind of an intro to it. But if you the main thing is you want to follow recipes. You don't want to play. You don't want to experiment too much. These are a lot of these recipes have been developed over a long period of time, where they know just how much you need to put in of what to preserve it, correctly. But I definitely recommend, if you want to get into it, there's some really great books. Really great books on a lot of different, food preservation techniques, but like canning and stuff. Yeah, definitely get a book, take a class, and just follow some recipes and stuff. Like I said, it's not something to be scared of. It's just something to kind of take, seriously. So you do it right. Cool, and that's basically the class today. I'll stick around for like another 10 minutes or so if anyone has any particular questions about food preserving or anything like this. This is the last class for the series, but starting next week, we have a basic gardening series, same time, Tuesday and Thursday, 11 to 1. And then the week after that, we're starting our urban advanced grower webinar series, where we have 20 some classes all throughout the year, that with all different things, from like foraging to like hydroponics to different things like that. And that's just going to continue. Those are going to be evening classes, but again, sign up those. We're going to record those. Even if you can't get in the actual class, sign up and you'll get the recordings on the waiting list. The PowerPoint of this presentation should be up in the Google Doc. I did upload it 20 minutes before the presentation. If you don't see it, check it again, and if not, I can send that to you. Oh, thank you so much. I'll show you for those people that weren't at the beginning of the class. If anyone wants to see how to actually sign up for the other classes. And yeah, if you have any questions on any of that, just let me know. Oh, thank you all so much. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, anyone can access the recordings for any of these. Well, for these, you want to make sure to, because we're going to be. I'll probably post them some places, and we'll generally do it. But if you want to